Michael stood motionless before his grandmother's grave, the crisp autumn air tugging at the edges of his coat. The marble headstone bore her name, Eleanor Mayfield, etched alongside the dates that marked the beginning and end of a life filled with quiet wisdom and unyielding love. In his trembling hands he held a letter, its edges worn and the faint scent of lavender still clinging to it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, delicate yet firm, carrying the weight of her final words. "My dearest Michael," the letter began, and already he could hear her voice, warm and steady, as if she were standing beside him. "If you are reading this, then my time has passed, and you must now undertake a task that will seem both strange and burdensome. Beneath this stone lies not just my resting place, but a passage to something greater. Dig, my dear boy. Find what I have left for you." Michael's breath caught in his throat. The words felt unreal, as though they belonged to a mystery novel rather than his own life. Yet he knew his grandmother well enough to understand that her instructions, no matter how unusual, were always deliberate. She had a way of seeing the world differently, weaving lessons and secrets into the fabric of everyday life. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket. His gaze lingered on the headstone, and his mind wandered back to the summers he had spent in her care. Her modest home had been a sanctuary for him, a place of laughter and learning. She had taught him to read by the flicker of an old oil lamp, shared stories of her youth, and instilled in him a sense of wonder that he carried to this day. Eleanor had always been a guiding light in Michael's life. She had a way of simplifying the most complex problems with her unwavering belief in kindness and courage. "The world hides its treasures in the most unexpected places," she'd often say, her eyes twinkling with a secret she never fully revealed. Now, standing at her grave, Michael wondered if she had been speaking literally all along. The cemetery was empty save for the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Michael's fingers tightened around the spade he had brought, unsure whether he had the strength, physically or emotionally, to carry out her request. He crouched down, running his fingers along the cold marble as if seeking her reassurance. "What did you mean, Gran?" he murmured, his voice barely audible. "What am I supposed to find?" The silence offered no answers, but the letter's words seemed to echo in his mind. "Dig. Find what I have left for you." The simplicity of the instruction contrasted sharply with the enormity of its implication. What could she have hidden here? Why had she kept it a secret until now? Michael stood, the spade feeling heavier in his grip. His heart pounded as he took his first step toward fulfilling her wish. He glanced around the cemetery, half expecting someone to stop him, but the world carried on as if oblivious to the weight of his decision. With each shovelful of earth, memories flooded back to him, her laughter when he spilled flour all over the kitchen, her stern but loving gaze when he'd been caught sneaking a cookie before dinner, her hands, frail but steady, knitting scarves for the local shelter. The ache of her absence was fresh, yet it propelled him forward, each dig a testament to her enduring presence in his life. The spade struck something solid, and Michael froze. The sound reverberated through the stillness, louder than it had any right to be. His breath quickened as he knelt, brushing away the dirt to reveal a weathered wooden lid. It was small, unassuming, but its placement beneath the grave filled it with an air of significance. His hands trembled as he pried the lid open. Inside, he found a sealed envelope and a rusted key resting atop a folded cloth. The envelope bore his name in her handwriting, and for a moment, he hesitated. Opening it felt like crossing a threshold, stepping into a reality he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But he had come this far. Michael opened the envelope and unfolded the letter within. The words were brief, yet they carried a gravity that sent chills down his spine. "Michael, this is only the beginning. The key will guide you. Trust your heart. Love always, Gran." He looked down at the key, its weight suddenly feeling heavier than the spade he'd held moments ago. The mystery deepened, and his resolve solidified. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: he would see it through. As he stood, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest scent of lavender. Michael's heart raced, his mind filled with questions. What had she left for him, and why? He gripped the key tightly and stepped away from the grave, the weight of his grandmother's legacy pressing down on him. The answers waited, just beyond the next door. The evening sun cast long shadows across the cemetery as Michael continued his work. Each shovelful of dirt felt heavier than the last, not from the physical strain but from the weight of uncertainty pressing on his mind. He couldn't shake the unease creeping into his thoughts. His grandmother had always been straightforward, so why cloak her final wish in such mystery? The hollow sound of metal striking something solid jolted him from his thoughts. Michael froze, his breath caught in his throat. Kneeling, he brushed the dirt away with trembling hands, revealing a wooden surface. It wasn't the lid of a coffin as he had feared but a plank embedded with iron handles. His heart raced as he leaned closer, examining the structure. It wasn't just a makeshift covering, it was an entrance. Michael hesitated. His fingers hovered over the handles, his mind wrestling with doubts. What if this wasn't what his grandmother intended? What if he was disturbing something that should remain untouched? Yet her words rang clear in his mind, dig. Find what I have left for you. Steeling himself, he gripped the handles and pulled. The plank creaked as it lifted, revealing a dark, narrow stairwell descending into the earth. A cool draft wafted up, carrying with it the faint scent of damp stone and something metallic. He hesitated again, but the thought of his grandmother's unwavering trust in him propelled him forward. He reached for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as he descended. The steps were uneven, carved from stone and worn smooth by time. The air grew colder with each step, wrapping around him like a shroud. Michael's mind raced with possibilities. What could she have hidden here? Why had she kept it a secret, even in her final days? At the bottom of the stairwell, he found himself in a small room. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with items that gleamed faintly under the flashlight's beam. Gold coins, antique jewelry, and ornate trinkets sparkled in the dim light. In the center of the room stood a chest, its polished wood adorned with intricate carvings. Michael's breath caught as he took it all in. This was more than a hidden legacy, it was a treasure trove. His hands shook as he approached the chest. He knelt beside it, running his fingers over the carvings before lifting the lid. Inside, beneath layers of velvet cloth, lay stacks of neatly bound bills and a sealed envelope. The sight of such wealth was overwhelming. His grandmother, who had lived so modestly, had kept this hidden for decades. Why? Michael picked up the envelope, his name written across it in her familiar handwriting. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. The letter inside was short but brimming with emotion. My dearest Michael, if you are reading this, then you have found what I could not share during my lifetime. This treasure is yours now, but it comes with a responsibility. It was never meant for one person's comfort but for the betterment of many. Use it wisely. Bring hope to those who need it most, and you will honor not just me but yourself. Remember, true wealth lies in the joy you bring to others. Love always, Gran. Michael sat back, the letter trembling in his hands. His grandmother's words were clear, yet they left him conflicted. This fortune could change his life, pay off debts, buy a home, secure a future he had always dreamed of. But her wish was selfless, urging him to look beyond his own needs. The room felt smaller as the weight of her expectations settled on him. Could he fulfill her wish? Could he resist the temptation to use this newfound wealth for himself? The questions gnawed at him, and he found no immediate answers. The glow of the treasure seemed dimmer now, overshadowed by the moral dilemma it presented. Michael folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the chest. He stood, his flashlight sweeping over the room one last time. The treasures glittered, but they no longer dazzled him in the same way. He climbed the stairs slowly, the key from the first letter clutched tightly in his hand. As he emerged into the cool evening air, the sight of his grandmother's headstone grounded him. You've left me with quite the challenge, Gran, he whispered, his voice carrying a mix of reverence and apprehension. The question of what to do next lingered, unresolved, as he closed the wooden plank and covered it with soil. The key in his hand felt heavier than ever, a symbol of the choices that lay ahead. Michael knew one thing for certain: his journey was just beginning. Michael sat at his kitchen table, the letter from his grandmother spread out in front of him. The words felt heavier now, etched into his mind as if they were a part of him. The treasure sat hidden beneath the soil, yet its presence loomed large, filling the room with a silent tension. He had spent days turning the possibilities over in his mind. The money could change everything for him. It could pay off his student loans, fund a business he'd always dreamed of starting, or secure a life of comfort he had never known. Yet each time he veered toward keeping it, his grandmother's words resurfaced. "True wealth lies in the joy you bring to others." Michael exhaled sharply and leaned back in his chair. He had to start somewhere, but the enormity of the task paralyzed him. Finally, he pulled out his laptop and began researching local charities. After hours of searching, he settled on a small community food bank, a place that quietly but consistently provided meals for families in need. The decision felt right, a small but meaningful first step. That evening, Michael walked into the food bank with an envelope tucked into his jacket pocket. He didn't introduce himself, or linger. Instead, he slipped the envelope containing a modest donation into the anonymous drop box by the door and left without a word. Outside, the night air felt fresher, lighter, as though he had set something in motion. Over the next few weeks, Michael repeated the process. Each donation was small but purposeful, delivered anonymously to various local organizations. The act became a routine, grounding him and giving him a sense of connection to something larger than himself. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't doing enough. His grandmother's treasure held the power to transform lives, and he had only scratched the surface. One morning, while delivering another donation, Michael lingered near the entrance of a community center. Inside, volunteers bustled about, organizing supplies and chatting warmly. He watched through the glass door, hesitant to step inside but drawn to the energy of the place. Finally, he pushed the door open, the sound of a small bell announcing his arrival. A young woman turned to greet him, her face lighting up with a warm smile. "Hi there! Can I help you?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Michael hesitated, then nodded. I'm here to drop off a donation," he said, pulling another envelope from his pocket. He extended it toward her, feeling self-conscious under her curious gaze. She took the envelope, her expression softening as she glanced at its contents. "Thank you. This will make a big difference," she said sincerely. "I'm Clara, by the way. Are you new to the area?" Michael shook his head. "No, I've lived here my whole life. I just haven't done this before." Clara smiled again, her enthusiasm contagious. "Well, welcome. Every bit helps. If you're interested, we're always looking for volunteers." The idea of volunteering hadn't crossed his mind, but something about Clara's earnestness made him pause. He nodded slowly. "Maybe. I'll think about it." Over the next few weeks, Michael found himself returning to the community center, not just with donations but with a growing interest in the work being done there. Clara's passion for helping others was infectious, and her stories of lives transformed through their efforts gave him a new perspective on his grandmother's wishes. One afternoon, while organizing a shipment of supplies with Clara, Michael shared a small piece of his story. "My grandmother was the kindest person I've ever known," he said, carefully stacking boxes. "She believed in helping people, even when she didn't have much herself." Clara looked at him thoughtfully. "Sounds like she left you more than just memories," she said gently. Michael smiled faintly, her words resonating more deeply than she realized. He didn't tell her about the treasure, not yet, but her presence and encouragement gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. By the end of the day, Michael watched as the supplies were distributed to grateful families. The sight filled him with a quiet pride and a growing sense of hope. He wasn't just honoring his grandmother's wish, he was discovering a path that felt uniquely his own. As he walked home that evening, the key in his pocket felt lighter, as though the weight of its responsibility had begun to shift. For the first time since uncovering the treasure, Michael felt a glimmer of clarity. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew this: he was on the right path. The weeks turned into months, and Michael found himself spending more and more time at the community center. What had begun as a hesitant foray into charity had blossomed into a commitment that filled his days with purpose. Clara was always there, her energy boundless, her optimism contagious. Together, they tackled every project with determination, from organizing food drives to mentoring local youth. Their bond deepened with every shared effort. Michael admired Clara's dedication and her ability to inspire those around her. She had a way of making people believe in a better future, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. Yet, as their friendship grew, so did Michael's insecurities. Clara's life outside the community center was a stark contrast to his own. She came from a well-off family, her affluence evident in the small details: her car, her tailored clothes, the ease with which she navigated social circles. Though she never flaunted her wealth, Michael couldn't help but feel the gap between them. He wondered if his connection to her was genuine, or if he was drawn to her as a way to validate himself. More troubling, he questioned whether his charitable efforts were motivated by his grandmother's wishes or a desire to impress Clara. One evening, as they packed up after a particularly successful fundraiser, Clara noticed his uncharacteristic silence. "Hey," she said, nudging him gently. "You've been quiet today. What's on your mind?" Michael hesitated, then sighed. I've been thinking a lot about why I'm doing this," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if my reasons are pure." Clara frowned slightly but didn't interrupt. Her patience encouraged him to continue. "The truth is, I wasn't always this involved," he said, his voice low. "It started with something my grandmother left for me. She left me a fortune, hidden away, with instructions to use it for good. That's why I started donating, why I'm here. But now I'm not sure if I'm doing this because it's the right thing or because I feel obligated." Clara's eyes widened in surprise, but her expression softened as he spoke. When he finished, she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Michael, the fact that you're questioning yourself shows how much you care. Most people wouldn't even think twice about keeping that money for themselves. But you've chosen to share it, to make a difference. That says a lot about who you are." Michael looked at her, her words offering a glimmer of reassurance. "I just don't want to lose sight of why I'm doing this," he said. Clara smiled. "Then don't. Keep reminding yourself of the lives you're changing. And if you ever need a reminder, just look around." She gestured to the community center, where volunteers were packing up the last of the supplies, their laughter and chatter filling the space with warmth. "Your grandmother left you a legacy," Clara continued. "But you've turned it into something even bigger. Don't underestimate that." For the first time, Michael felt a sense of clarity. Clara's words cut through his doubts, grounding him in the reality of what they had accomplished together. He realized that his feelings for her weren't tied to her affluence, or his insecurities. They were rooted in the admiration he felt for her compassion and strength. Over the following weeks, Michael and Clara grew even closer. Their shared projects became a foundation for something deeper, a relationship built on mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. Michael confided more in Clara about his grandmother, sharing stories of her kindness and the lessons she had instilled in him. In turn, Clara opened up about her own struggles, her decision to use her privilege to help others, and her desire to create meaningful change. One evening, as they walked home after a long day at the center, Clara turned to Michael. "You know, you've done more than just honor your grandmother's wishes," she said. "You've created something she would be proud of. And you've inspired me to dream even bigger." Michael smiled, her words filling him with a renewed sense of purpose. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said softly. Their journey together was far from over, but for the first time, Michael felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he knew that with Clara by his side, he could face whatever challenges came their way. The transformation within the community was undeniable. What had started as a modest effort between Michael and Clara had blossomed into a network of initiatives that touched lives far and wide. Food drives, educational workshops, and support programs sprang up, fueled by the wealth Michael had uncovered and Clara's unwavering determination. Together, they had built more than just projects, they had built hope. Walking through the bustling community center one afternoon, Michael couldn't help but marvel at the changes. The once quiet halls were now filled with children's laughter, volunteers working tirelessly, and families finding a safe space to rebuild. Each face told a story, and each story reminded him why he had chosen to honor his grandmother's wishes. But the journey was far from smooth. As their efforts gained visibility, so too did the skepticism. A local journalist published an article questioning the origins of the funds that fueled their projects. "Who is this Michael?" the headline asked. "And why won't he reveal his source of wealth?" At first, Michael tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the work at hand. But the questions began to seep into the community. Some people whispered doubts, speculating that Michael's charity was a front for ulterior motives. Even some volunteers hesitated, their confidence shaken by the rumors. "We'll get through this," Clara assured him one evening as they reviewed plans for an upcoming event. Her steady presence was a constant source of comfort. "People will see the results and realize the truth. Just give it time." Michael nodded, but the doubts lingered. He couldn't shake the fear that he might let his grandmother down, that the legacy she entrusted to him might be overshadowed by suspicion. He threw himself into the work, determined to let the impact speak for itself. One day, a plain envelope arrived at the community center, addressed to Michael. Curious, he opened it and found a handwritten letter inside. The neat, looping script conveyed a story that brought tears to his eyes. "Dear Michael, I don't know if you remember me, but my family received help from your charity a few months ago. At the time, we were at our lowest point. My husband had lost his job, and I was struggling to keep food on the table for our children. I was ashamed to ask for help, but your volunteers treated us with such kindness and dignity that it felt like a lifeline. Thanks to the support we received, my husband was able to attend a job training program, and I've started a small business baking bread for local cafes. Our lives have turned around in ways I never thought possible, and it's all because of the work you and your team have done. Please know that what you're doing matters more than words can express." With gratitude, Sarah Reynolds. Michael read the letter twice, the words sinking into his heart like an anchor. He shared it with Clara, who smiled through her own tears. "This is why we keep going," she said softly. The letter became a turning point for Michael. It was a tangible reminder of the lives they were changing, a testament to the power of compassion and action. Slowly but surely, the skepticism began to fade. Families like Sarah's shared their stories, and the community began to rally around Michael and Clara's efforts. The momentum grew, and with it, the scope of their impact. A derelict park was transformed into a vibrant playground. A scholarship program was launched for underprivileged students. Local businesses joined their cause, donating resources and time to support the initiatives. One evening, as Michael stood at the park during its grand reopening, he watched children climb on brightly colored jungle gyms and parents chat on newly installed benches. The joy in their faces was palpable, a ripple of hope that extended far beyond anything he had imagined. Clara joined him, her eyes scanning the scene with quiet satisfaction. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said. Michael nodded, his voice filled with emotion. "It's everything Gran would have wanted. I finally understand what she meant about true wealth. It's not just about helping others. It's about creating something that lasts, something that grows." Clara smiled, slipping her hand into his. "And you've done that, Michael. We've done that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in golden hues, Michael felt a profound sense of peace. The doubts that had once haunted him were gone, replaced by the certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. His grandmother's legacy had become his own, and the ripples of their work would carry on long after the day's light had faded. The air was crisp as Michael walked through the cemetery, the setting sun casting long shadows across the gravestones. In his hand, he carried a bouquet of lavender, his grandmother's favorite. Each step felt deliberate, carrying the weight of the journey he had undertaken since her passing. He stopped in front of her grave, the familiar stone etched with her name, and knelt to place the flowers at its base. For a long moment, he stood silently, letting the memories wash over him. He thought about the letter that had set everything in motion, the hidden passage, and the treasure that had tested his resolve. He remembered the doubts, the struggles, and the countless lives he and Clara had touched along the way. Everything he had done was for her, to honor her belief in the power of kindness and generosity. "I hope I've made you proud, Gran," he said softly, his voice barely audible in the stillness. As the words left his lips, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves around him. For a fleeting moment, Michael felt her presence, warm and reassuring. He looked up, and in the corner of his eye, he thought he saw her standing there, her kind smile as radiant as ever. She didn't say a word, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes, filling him with a peace he hadn't felt in years. When he blinked, she was gone, but the feeling lingered, like the scent of lavender in the air. Michael exhaled deeply, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the key she had left him, its surface worn smooth from his constant touch. With a small smile, he placed it gently at the base of the headstone. "Thank you," he whispered. The sound of footsteps behind him broke the moment. Michael turned to see Clara approaching, her expression soft as she carried a thermos in one hand. "I thought you might want some company," she said, offering him a cup of tea. He smiled, taking the cup gratefully. "You always know exactly what I need," he said, his voice filled with affection. Clara stepped closer, her gaze falling on the grave. "She must have been an incredible woman to raise someone like you," she said. Michael felt a pang of emotion but nodded. "She was. Everything I am is because of her." They stood together in silence for a moment, the golden light of the setting sun wrapping around them like a warm embrace. Then Michael reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Turning to Clara, he took a deep breath, his hand steady despite the rush of emotions coursing through him. "Clara," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This journey has taught me so much about who I am and what I want in life. But the most important thing I've learned is that I don't want to do any of it without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Clara's eyes widened in surprise, tears welling as a smile broke across her face. "Yes," she said without hesitation, her voice trembling with joy. "Of course I will." Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced, their shared laughter carrying on the breeze. In that moment, everything felt complete. Love, purpose, and the legacy his grandmother had entrusted to him all intertwined into a future that felt bright and full of promise. As they turned to leave, hand in hand, Michael glanced back at the grave one last time. The lavender swayed gently in the breeze, and for a moment, he thought he saw a faint shimmer near the base of the stone, as if it held one last secret. The moment passed quickly, leaving only the quiet serenity of the cemetery. The camera lingers on the grave as Michael and Clara walk away, their figures silhouetted against the fading light. The scene holds, the key glinting faintly among the lavender, hinting that the story may not be entirely over. The screen fades to black, leaving viewers with a sense of closure but also the tantalizing possibility of more to discover.